We had left the castle, the crown, and the cruel destiny of an arranged marriage behind us, disappearing into the night on a freight train bound for the unknown. We were cold. We were frightened. And we were criminals in the eyes of the law. But as the frozen landscape of Sarkovia faded into the distance, replaced by the industrial smoke of the West, we knew there was no turning back. Our journey was just beginning. I often look at old photos of Paris from the 60s, images of glamorous women in miniskirts and cafes full of smoke and philosophy. But that wasn't the Paris we found. Our Paris smelled of coal dust, unwashed bodies, and fear. We arrived at the Gare de l'Est hidden inside a cattle car, huddled in the corner under a tarp, praying the inspectors wouldn't check the livestock too closely. When the train finally hissed to a halt, we didn't step out onto a red carpet. We crawled out into the gray industrial dawn, two exhausted fugitives leading a nervous horse into a city that didn't know we existed. We were covered in soot, our faces streaked with black grime, shivering in clothes that were too thin for the damp French winter. The noise of the city was a physical assault. Cars honked, vendors shouted, and the sheer number of people terrified me. In Sarkovia, I could ride for miles without seeing a soul. Here, humanity was stacked on top of each other. I held on to Eclipse's bridle so tight my knuckles turned white, while Dara gripped my arm, her eyes darting around, scanning for uniforms, for police, for anyone who might recognize a missing princess. The first few hours were a desperate blur. We knew we couldn't keep Eclipse. A massive black stallion in the middle of a crowded city was a beacon, drawing eyes we didn't want. We led him away from the busy station, walking for miles until we reached the outskirts, where the factories gave way to small farms and stables. My heart was breaking with every step. Eclipse had carried us to freedom, and now I had to betray him. We found a livery stable run by an old man with kind eyes and calloused hands. I told him a lie about being a student who had run out of money. He looked at the horse, then at me, and I think he knew I was lying, but he didn't pry. He offered us a sum that was a fraction of what Eclipse was worth, but enough to start a new life. Saying goodbye was the hardest thing I had ever done. I pressed my forehead against Eclipse's velvet nose, breathing in his scent one last time, whispering my gratitude. As we walked away, leaving him behind in a strange stall, I felt like I was leaving a piece of my soul in the straw. With the money from the horse and the cash from my father's safe, we found a room. It wasn't an apartment, it was a closet with a window. It was on the 6th floor of a crumbling building in a neighborhood where tourists never went. There was no elevator, no heating, and the bathroom was down the hall. But when we locked the door behind us and collapsed onto the sagging mattress, it felt like a palace. For the first time in days, we stopped running. But the fear didn't leave us. Every time a siren wailed outside, I jumped. I knew my father wouldn't just let me go. He would have spies looking for a blonde girl with a royal bearing. I looked in the cracked mirror above the sink and saw Princess Elena staring back at me. She was a liability. She had to die so that I could live. I need to change, I told Dara the next morning. She understood immediately. We went to a pharmacy and bought the cheapest box of hair dye we could find. A violent chemical red, and a pair of sharp sewing scissors. Back in our tiny room, I sat on a wooden chair in the center of the floor. Dara draped a towel over my shoulders. She picked up the scissors, her hands hovering near my head. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Your hair is your crown." "I don't want a crown," I answered, looking at her reflection in the mirror. "I want a life." I nodded, giving her permission. The first snip was loud in the quiet room. A long, golden lock fell to the floor, curling like a dead snake. Then another, and another. I watched as the symbol of my vanity, my femininity, and my royal lineage piled up around my feet. I didn't cry. I felt lighter with every cut. When the hair was short, Barely touching my jawline, we applied the dye. The smell of ammonia was stinging and sharp, burning my eyes, but I welcomed the pain. It felt like a ritual of purification. We waited 30 minutes, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, holding hands. When I washed it out and looked in the mirror again, a stranger stared back. The girl in the glass had fiery red hair, sharp angles, and eyes that looked older than 18. Elena was gone. Lena was born. Dara stood behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist, resting her chin on my shoulder. She looked at the new me with a mixture of awe and sadness. "You look like a revolutionary," she whispered. I turned in her arms and kissed her, tasting the metallic tang of the dye on my skin. "I am," I replied. "We both are." That night, we slept in the narrow bed, limbs tangled together for warmth. The room was freezing, and we could hear the neighbors arguing through the thin walls. We had no servants, no future, and no safety net. But as I listened to Dara's steady breathing, I realized I had never slept so soundly in my life. The golden cage was far away, and even though the world outside was gray and hard, inside that room, everything was technicolor. We were two insignificant specks in a city of millions, anonymous and free. I closed my eyes, visualizing the map of Paris in my mind, erasing the borders of Sarkovia. Tomorrow we would have to figure out how to eat, how to work, how to survive. But tonight we were just Lena and Dara, and for the first time in history, nobody owned us but ourselves. We found the address written on the back of the postcard 3 days later. It was in Montmartre, a neighborhood that felt like a different planet compared to the stiff boulevards of central Paris. Here, the streets were narrow and winding, smelling of roasted chestnuts, oil paint, and cheap wine. We stood in front of a peeling blue door at the top of a steep staircase, my heart pounding in my throat. We were gambling everything on the hope that a woman Dara hadn't seen in 10 years would welcome a fugitive princess and her niece. Dara knocked, a tentative rat-a-tat-tat that barely made a sound against the heavy wood. We waited. I squeezed her hand, feeling the tremors in her fingers. Just as we were about to turn away, thinking no one was home, the door swung open. A woman stood there, filling the frame with a presence that was larger than life. She was tall, with skin the color of deep mahogany and hair wrapped in a vibrant orange turban. She wore a loose, colorful caftan that swirled around her like a personal storm. It was Antoinette. She looked at Dara, squinting through the smoke of a thin cigarette holder. For a second, nobody breathed. Then, a slow, wide smile spread across her face, revealing a gold tooth that glinted in the afternoon sun. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't ask why we were there. She simply threw her arms open and pulled Dara into a hug so fierce it lifted her off the ground. "My little bird," she boomed, her voice raspy and warm. "You flew a long way." She ushered us inside, treating me not with the deference of a subject to royalty, but with the casual hospitality one offers a stray cat. Her apartment was a chaotic explosion of color. Fabrics were draped over every surface. Silks, velvets, cottons in patterns I had never seen before. There were dressmakers' dummies in the corners, pinned with half-finished creations that looked like sculptures. The air smelled of spicy stew and lavender steam. It was messy, loud, and absolutely wonderful. Over bowls of thick, spicy gumbo that burned my tongue in the best way possible, we told her everything. I watched Dara come alive as she spoke, her hands moving animatedly as she described our escape. I stayed quiet mostly, feeling a sudden wave of inadequacy. In the castle, I was the center of the world. Here, among these strong, self-made women, I felt like a useless ornament. I didn't know how to boil water. I didn't know how to sew a button. I was a princess with no kingdom and no skills. Antoinette listened to our story without blinking. When we finished, she leaned back in her velvet armchair and laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was a sound of pure delight. "So," she said, pointing a manicured finger at me, "you stole the king's daughter and the king's horse. I always knew my blood ran hot, Dara, but I didn't know it ran that hot." She looked at me then, her eyes shrewd and assessing. "And you, Little Highness. You gave up a crown for love. That's either very brave or very stupid. I like it." She offered us a deal right there. We could stay in the small storage room at the back of the apartment. It was cramped and filled with rolls of fabric, but it was warm. In exchange, we had to work. "I run a business, not a charity," Antoinette declared. "We make costumes for the cabaret dancers in Pigalle. It's fast work, it pays in cash, and nobody asks for papers." The next morning, our new life began. I watched in amazement as Dara sat down at an old clunky sewing machine and tamed it instantly. Her hands, which used to braid my hair with such gentleness, now fed fabric under the needle with terrifying speed. She had inherited the family gift. She understood how clothes were put together, how to make a seam invisible, how to make cheap satin look like expensive silk. She was a natural, and for the first time, she was the one with the power. I, on the other hand, was a disaster. I tried to hem a skirt and pricked my finger so many times I bled on the white chiffon. I tried to cook and nearly burned the kitchen down. I felt my shame growing with every hour. I was a burden. I sat by the window, watching the rain fall on the gray slate roofs, wondering if I had made a mistake. Maybe love wasn't enough if you couldn't pull your own weight. Antoinette found me there one evening, sulking. She didn't coddle me. She dropped a sketchbook and a stick of charcoal into my lap. "Stop feeling sorry for yourself," she snapped, though her eyes were kind. "You were raised in a palace. You've seen the finest clothes in Europe. You know what elegance looks like. Dara has the hands, but you have the eye. Draw." I picked up the charcoal. I hesitated at first, my hand hovering over the blank white paper. Then I closed my eyes and thought about the clothes I had hated, the stiff corsets, the heavy layers that restricted movement. I thought about riding Eclipse, the wind in my shirt. I started to sketch. I didn't draw gowns for princesses. I drew clothes for women who wanted to move. I drew trousers with wide legs, jackets cut like men's riding coats but softened for a woman's frame. I drew the freedom I had always craved. When Dara saw the sketches later that night, she went silent. She traced the lines of charcoal with her fingertip, her eyes wide. "I can make this," she whispered, looking up at me with a reverence that made my knees weak. "If you draw it, Lena, I can make it real." In that moment, the dynamic of our relationship shifted again. We weren't just lovers on the run anymore. We were partners. We worked late into the night, the only light coming from a small desk lamp. I sketched, and she sewed. The rhythmic whir, whir, whir of the machine became the soundtrack of our life. We were building something together, stitch by stitch, but outside our warm bubble, the city was dangerous. We were two women without identification in a country that was tightening its borders. We had talent, and we had love, but we were living on borrowed time, and I knew that sooner or later, the real world would come knocking on Antoinette's blue door. By 1971, we had found a rhythm, but we had also found the walls of our new cage. Paris was often called the City of Light, but for two women living in the margins, it had plenty of shadows. We had started to take private commissions, delivering dresses to the wealthy wives of bankers and diplomats in the 16th arrondissement. The money was good, better than the cabaret costumes, but every visit to those gilded apartments chipped away a little piece of my soul. It wasn't the work that hurt. It was the way the world looked at us. I remember one afternoon vividly. We were delivering a velvet evening gown to a Madame Giroux, a woman who dripped with diamonds, but possessed the manners of a street cat. We arrived at her service entrance, as instructed. Dara was carrying the heavy box with the dress, while I held the sketchbook with designs for her next season. When the housekeeper let us in, Madame Giroux didn't even look at Dara. She pointed a manicured finger at the floor and said, "Put it there, and be careful not to dirty the carpet with your shoes." Dara placed the box down with the grace of a queen, her face a mask of calm indifference. I, however, felt the old Sarkovian rage bubbling up in my throat. Madame Giroux turned to me, smiling brightly, completely ignoring the woman who had actually sewn every intricate stitch of the masterpiece in the box. "You have such a wonderful eye, Lena," she gushed, touching my arm. "It must be so hard to find good help these days. Is she reliable? I have a friend who is looking for a maid." The air in the room froze. I looked at Dara, standing by the door in her simple gray coat, her hands clasped in front of her. She was worth 10 of this woman. She was brilliant, kind, and resilient. Yet to Madame Giroux, she was just help. She was invisible. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell this woman that she was speaking to the future owner of the biggest fashion house in Paris. But I didn't. I needed the money. I swallowed my pride, tasting bile, and forced a smile. "She is my partner, madame," I said, my voice tight. "And she is not available for hire." We walked home in silence, the check burning a hole in my pocket. The humiliation lingered like a bad smell. But it wasn't just the racism that suffocated us. It was the silence we had to impose on our love. In our tiny room, we were wives. We shared a bed, a life, and a heart. But the moment we stepped onto the cobblestones, we became cousins. We became roommates. We had to shrink our love down to something small and platonic to survive. I hated it. I hated that I couldn't hold her hand when we walked along the Seine at sunset. I hated that when we went to the cinema, we had to sit with a careful distance between our shoulders. Paris was supposed to be the city of romance, but it felt like that romance was reserved for men and women. For us, public affection was a dangerous gamble. One wrong look, one lingering touch, and we could lose our apartment, our clients, or worse. There was a night when we were celebrating Dara's birthday at a small bistro. We had saved up for weeks to afford a bottle of real wine. The mood was light, the candle flickering between us, casting a warm glow on Dara's face. She laughed at something I said, throwing her head back, and she looked so beautiful that I forgot the rules. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine, squeezing it tight. The waiter arrived at that exact moment. He looked at our joined hands, then up at my face with a sneer of disgust. He slammed the check down on the table, the wine glass wobbling dangerously. "We don't want trouble here," he muttered, loud enough for the couple at the next table to hear. "Pay and leave." The shame was instant and hot. I pulled my hand back as if I had been burned. Dara looked down at her plate, the joy evaporating from her eyes instantly. We walked home in the rain, walking 2 feet apart. I felt like a coward. I had fled a kingdom to be with her, yet I couldn't even defend our right to hold hands over dinner. When we got back to the safety of our room, I broke down. I paced the floor, ranting about the injustice, about how unfair it was that we had to hide like criminals when our love was the purest thing I knew. Dara sat on the edge of the bed and watched me, her expression unreadable. When I finally ran out of breath, she stood up and walked over to me. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She took my face in her hands, forcing me to look at her. "The world is slow, Lena," she said softly. "It takes a long time for people to catch up to love like ours. But I don't need the world to understand. I just need you to stay." "I don't want to just stay," I argued, leaning into her touch. "I want to build a world where we don't have to hide. I want to build a fortress where nobody can tell us who to be or who to love." I looked at the sketches pinned to the wall, drawings of bold, unapologetic women wearing clothes that demanded attention. A seed of an idea began to sprout in my mind, wild and ambitious. "We can't keep working for people like Madame Giroux," I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a train. "We can't keep entering through the service door. We need our own door. We need a place where you are the queen, not the help. I grabbed a piece of charcoal and turned to a fresh page. We're going to open a shop, Dara. A real shop. With your name on the label. Dara looked skeptical. With what money? We barely make rent. But I was already drawing, my hand flying across the paper. I was sketching a storefront with a large glass window. Above the door, I wrote the name in bold, sweeping letters. It wasn't just a store. It was a declaration of independence. We'll sell the last of the ruby earrings, I said, referring to the emergency stash I had sewn into the lining of my coat. It's enough for a deposit on that derelict space near the canal. It's a bad neighborhood now, but it won't be forever. I turned the sketchbook around to show her. We're done hiding, Dara. If they won't give us a seat at the table, we'll build our own table. The ruby earrings were the last tether to my mother, and I sold them to a man with nicotine-stained fingers for a fraction of what they were worth. Walking out of that pawn shop with a thick envelope of cash in my coat pocket, I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt lighter. Those rubies had been worn at stiff state dinners and silent, miserable breakfasts. Now, they were going to buy lumber, paint, and freedom. We took the metro to the Canal Saint-Martin, a neighborhood that was gray and industrial in 1972, far from the polished luxury of the fashion district. We found a space that had been a bakery years before. The windows were grime-streaked, and the air inside smelled of old flour and damp wood. But the bones of the place were good. It had high ceilings and a back room big enough for a cutting table. When the landlord handed me the keys, he looked at my red hair and Dara's dark skin and asked if we were opening a laundry. No, I said, gripping the cold metal key in my palm. We are building an empire. The next month was a blur of physical labor. We couldn't afford contractors, so we did everything ourselves. I learned to spackle walls, my hands covered in white dust, while Dara learned to sand the floorboards until the original oak shone through the grime. There was a raw, sweaty intimacy to it. We would eat sandwiches sitting on the floor covered in drop cloths, too tired to talk, communicating with tired smiles and shared bottles of water. We were building our home, not out of stone and lineage, but out of sweat and hope. When it came time to name it, we didn't argue. I painted the sign myself, standing on a wobbly ladder while Dara held my ankles to keep me steady. Maison Liberté, House of Freedom. The letters were stark and black against the white facade. It wasn't a name that promised luxury or exclusivity. It promised something more dangerous. It promised that whoever walked through those doors would leave looking like they owned themselves. The first collection was small, born from the sketches I had made in Antoinette's apartment. I didn't design the frothy, impractical dresses that were popular in the magazines. I designed for the woman I wanted to be, strong, mobile, and unafraid. We made wide-legged trousers in heavy wool, structured jackets that allowed you to raise your arms, and shirts with collars that framed the face like a picture. It was a scandal to put women in pants in some circles, but I didn't care. I was designing for the woman who needed to run for a train, or ride a horse, or flee a kingdom. Dara was the magician who turned my flat drawings into three-dimensional reality. She worked 18 hours a day, her foot pumping the pedal of the sewing machine in a hypnotic rhythm. I would watch her sometimes, marveling at the way her hands manipulated the fabric, coaxing it into shape with a touch that was both firm and tender. She wasn't just a seamstress. She was an engineer of cloth. Every seam was double-stitched, every buttonhole hand-finished. She put the same care into a stranger's jacket that she had once put into my royal braids. Opening day was a rainy Tuesday in October. We had no money for advertising, no famous friends to cut a ribbon. We simply unlocked the door, turned the sign to open, and waited. The silence was deafening. For 3 hours, the only people who passed by were workers hurrying to the factories and stray dogs. I stood behind the counter, my stomach twisting into knots. I looked at the rack of beautiful revolutionary clothes and felt a wave of nausea. What if I was wrong? What if nobody wanted freedom? What if they just wanted to be pretty? Then, the bell above the door chimed. A young woman walked in. She wasn't a wealthy matron. She was a student from the Sorbonne, with wild hair and ink stains on her fingers. She shook her umbrella, looking around the stark, white space with curiosity. She walked straight to the rack and pulled out a pair of high-waisted trousers in charcoal gray. "I've never seen a cut like this," she said, holding them up. "Can I really move in them?" "Try them on," Dara said, stepping out from the back room. "They were made for running." The girl disappeared into the changing room. When she came out, she looked at herself in the tall mirror and gasped. She didn't look like a student anymore. She looked like a force of nature. She turned, kicked her leg out, and laughed. "I'll take them," she said. "And the jacket too. That first sale was 60 francs. When the girl left, clutching her package like a prize, Dara and I looked at the money on the counter. It wasn't a fortune, but it was the first honest money we had ever earned. It didn't come from a royal treasury or a husband's allowance. It came from our hands, our minds, and our partnership. We locked the door, pulled down the shades, and danced in the middle of the empty shop floor to the sound of the rain hitting the glass. Word spread slowly, then all at once. The students told the artists told the journalists, and the journalists told the rich women who were bored with their stiff gowns. They came to Maison Liberté not for frills, but for the Sarkovian cut, as they called it, sharp, elegant, and vaguely military. We were suddenly busy. We hired 2 assistants. We bought a better coffee machine. We were successful. But success brought a new kind of danger. One afternoon, a photographer from Vogue Paris came to the shop. He wanted to feature the mysterious duo behind the brand. As he set up his lights, asking questions about our history and where we had trained, I saw Dara shrink back into the shadows of the workroom. We realized with a jolt of terror that we couldn't be the faces of our own revolution. If my face appeared in a magazine, my father would find us. We had built a glass house, and now the whole world was looking in. We solved the problem of fame by disappearing in plain sight. In the 1980s, when the world was loud, neon, and hungry for celebrity, I became a ghost. I stopped giving interviews. I stopped posing for photographs. When the fashion press demanded to see the face behind Maison Liberté, I gave them a caricature instead of a person. I dyed my hair an even brighter shade of red, wore oversized black sunglasses day and night, and adopted an air of icy distance. They called me the Iron Dame. They thought I was arrogant. They didn't know I was just a terrified daughter hiding from her father. Dara became the silent partner. To the public, she was my right hand, the logistical genius who kept the factory running. To the world, we were just 2 workaholic spinsters, married to our business. It was the perfect cover. Nobody looked twice at 2 women living together if they were busy building an empire. We used our success as a shield, hiding our hearts behind a wall of profit margins and silk samples. But the price of this disguise was high. We were invited to galas, to openings, to weddings of the elite. We would arrive together, stepping out of the same car, but the moment we entered the room, an invisible knife would sever the connection between us. I would have to stand on one side of the room, holding a glass of champagne, laughing at the jokes of boring men, while Dara stood on the other, invisible in her brilliance. I couldn't hold her hand. I couldn't fix her collar. I couldn't look at her with the love that consumed me. We were actors in a play that never ended. The only place we could drop the masks was at home. With the fortune we made from the 1985 collection, the one with the structured velvet blazers that every woman in Paris wanted, we bought this apartment. It occupies the entire top floor of a building near the river. It has high ceilings, a fireplace that actually works, and a balcony where you can see the Eiffel Tower sparkling at night. We bought it not as an investment, but as a fortress. I remember the first night we spent here. We didn't have any furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor of the empty living room. We ordered pizza and drank wine from paper cups. The city lights were glowing outside the tall French windows, but inside, it was just us. Dara leaned back against the wall, stretching her legs. I looked at her and noticed the first strands of silver appearing in her dark hair. Time was passing. We were getting older. "Are you happy, Lena?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. It was a question that weighed heavy in the air. We had money. We had safety. But we were still fugitives in our own lives. I crawled over to her on the mattress and rested my head on her lap. "I am happy here," I answered honestly. "Inside these walls, I am the happiest woman in the world. But out there, I am tired of lying." I ran my fingers over the rough fabric of her jeans. "I want to shout it from the rooftop. I want to tell them that the genius behind the brand is my wife. I want to kiss you in the middle of the Champs-Élysées." Dara smiled, a sad, sweet curving of her lips. She began to braid my hair, a habit she had never broken, even after I cut it short. "One day," she whispered, "the world is changing, my love. Just slowly. We just have to outlast them." And so, we endured. The years blurred together in a haze of fabric swatches and secret vacations. We traveled to places where nobody knew us. Tiny villages in Greece, cabins in the Swiss Alps, just to be able to walk hand in hand for a few days. We built a private universe that was rich and deep, filled with inside jokes and shared silences. We didn't need the world's validation because we had each other's devotion. But the past is a patient hunter. It waits. In the early 90s, technology began to shrink the world. The fax machine in our office would spit out orders from New York and Tokyo. We were international. And with that reach came the inevitable collision with my old life. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning in November. I was in my office, approving sketches for the spring line, when a letter arrived. It wasn't a fax. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope with a wax seal. I recognized the crest immediately, the double-headed eagle of Sarkovia. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the envelope as if it contained a bomb. For 25 years, there had been silence. Had they found us? Was this the warrant for my arrest? My hands shook so badly I could barely use the letter opener. Dara came in, saw my face, and immediately locked the door. She stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, anchoring me to the earth. I sliced the paper open and pulled out a single sheet of stiff stationery. It wasn't an arrest warrant. It was a notification from the Royal Chancellery. It was brief, formal, and cold. His Majesty, King Theodore of Sarkovia, has passed away peacefully in his sleep. It went on to detail the funeral arrangements and the coronation of my younger brother, a boy I barely remembered. I read the words twice, 3 times. The man who had terrorized my youth, who had threatened to kill my horse and sell me like cattle, was gone. The monster was dead. I didn't feel grief. I didn't cry. I felt a sudden, massive release of pressure, as if a steel band around my chest had finally snapped. I looked up at Dara, the paper trembling in my hand. "He's dead," I whispered, my voice cracking. "He can't hurt us anymore. He can't take me back." Dara took the letter from my hand and set it on the desk. She pulled me into her arms, and we stood there in the quiet office, listening to the rain. The king was dead, and for the first time since we fled into the snow on the back of a black horse, I realized we were truly, finally safe. The death of my father didn't bring tears, but it brought a strange, heavy silence to our apartment. For days, I walked around in a daze, feeling the phantom weight of the chains I had worn for so long finally falling away. We didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to stand by a grave in the freezing Sarkovian winter and pretend to mourn a man who had tried to break my spirit. Instead, I watched the coverage on the news, seeing the black carriages and the stone-faced dignitaries feeling like I was watching a movie about a stranger's life. But silence, I realized, wasn't enough. For 25 years, I had let them believe whatever lie they had concocted, that I was dead, or kidnapped, or lost in the mountains. I had let them erase me. Sitting on our balcony one evening, watching the lights of the boats on the Seine, I told Dara that I was tired of being a ghost. I wanted to send a message back to the land of the living. I didn't want their money or their titles. I just wanted them to know that I had won. I sat down at my desk the next morning with a sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. My hand hovered over the page, holding my favorite fountain pen. How do you start a letter to a family you haven't seen in a quarter of a century? I decided to write to my mother. She had been a silent accomplice to my father's cruelty, too weak to defend me, but she was the only one who might still have a shred of a heart left. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness, I began, the ink flowing dark and permanent onto the page. I am writing to tell you that I am alive. I wrote with a ferocity that surprised me. I told her about the cold nights in the attic, the hunger and the fear. But then I told her about the triumph. I told her that the wild girl she had tried to tame had built a kingdom of her own, not with armies, but with silk and scissors. Then came the hardest part. I had to tell her about Dara. I knew this would be the dagger in her aristocratic heart. I wrote, "You thought I ran away with a servant. You were wrong. I ran away with a queen." I described Dara not as the girl who brushed my hair, but as the brilliant woman who ran a multinational company, the partner who had held me when I cried, the love that had saved my life. I wanted her to know that the disgrace she feared was actually the greatest pride of my life. Dara came into the room as I was finishing. She read the letter over my shoulder, her hand resting warm and steady on my neck. When she reached the part about herself, I felt her fingers tighten. "Are you sure you want to send this?" she asked softly. "It's like throwing a grenade into a crypt." "Let it explode," I said, signing my name at the bottom. Not Princess Elena, but Lena. I folded the letter. Then I went to the small wooden box where we kept our treasures. I pulled out the old, yellowed postcard of the Eiffel Tower, the one Dara had given me in the castle, the one that had started everything. I slipped it into the envelope. It was the ultimate proof. We had made it. We walked to the post office together. The air was crisp, smelling of roasted chestnuts and exhaust fumes. I held the envelope in my hand like a weapon. When we reached the yellow mailbox on the corner, I hesitated for a split second. This was the final severance. Once I dropped this letter, there was no going back to the shadows. I looked at Dara, saw the encouragement in her eyes, and let it go. The metal flap clattered shut with a sound like a gavel striking a judge's desk. We waited for weeks. Every time the phone rang or the mail arrived, my heart would jump. I didn't know what I expected. Rage, denial, maybe a miracle of acceptance. But as the days turned into months, the mailbox remained empty. There were no royal couriers, no tearful reunions, no angry denunciations. There was only silence. The kind of absolute, frozen silence that covers a landscape after a heavy snow. At first, it hurt. The child inside me still wanted a mother, but slowly the pain turned into clarity. Their silence was their answer. They had chosen their pride over their daughter. They had chosen the dead traditions of Sarkovia over the living reality of my happiness. By not replying, they had set me free completely. One evening, Dara found me staring at the phone. She gently took the receiver from my hand and placed it back on the cradle. "They are the past, Lena," she said, pulling me into a slow dance in the middle of our living room. No music playing but the beat of our own hearts. "We are the present." I rested my head on her shoulder, closing my eyes. She was right. I didn't need a letter from a palace to tell me who I was. I looked around our beautiful apartment, at the sketches on the walls, at the life we had built from nothing. I realized that family isn't whose blood you carry. It's who you bleed for. My family wasn't in that cold castle in the mountains. My family was holding me right now, smelling of vanilla and fabric softener, humming a soft tune against my hair. Time is a thief, but it is also a sculptor. It took away our youth, smoothing the sharpness of our jawlines and painting silver into our hair. But in return, it carved something magnificent out of us. We retired in 2005, handing the keys of Maison Liberté to a brilliant young designer from Senegal who reminded Dara of her aunt. Leaving the company was easier than I expected. We had built the empire, conquered the world, and proved our point. Now, we wanted the one luxury we had never truly been able to afford: time. We slowed down. The frantic rhythm of fashion weeks and fabric orders was replaced by the gentle cadence of long breakfasts and slow walks along the Seine. I watched Dara age with a sense of wonder. She didn't fade, she distilled. Her skin, once smooth and taut, developed a map of fine lines around her eyes. Lines etched by decades of smiling at me. She became softer, quieter, but her presence was still the gravity that held my world together. But age demands its tithe. The hands that had scrubbed floors, sewn thousands of hems, and held me through my darkest nights began to betray her. Arthritis settled into Dara's fingers, swelling the joints and stealing her dexterity. It was a cruel irony that the woman who had expressed her love through service, through the magic of her touch, now struggled to button her own blouse. One morning, I found her sitting at the vanity table, the same antique one we had bought for our first apartment, staring at her hairbrush with frustration. She couldn't lift her arm high enough to reach the back of her head without pain. I saw the shame in her eyes, the same look she used to have when a wealthy client treated her like furniture. She hated being vulnerable. She hated needing help. I walked over to her and gently took the brush from her hand. "Let me," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. I stood behind her, just as she had stood behind me 40 years ago in a cold castle in Sarkovia. The roles had reversed, but the love remained the constant variable. I began to brush her hair, which was now a beautiful cloud of steel gray. The sensation of the bristles moving through her hair was a time machine. I remembered the first time she had touched me, how her care had saved my sanity. Now, it was my turn to be the caretaker. I brushed slowly, detangling the knots with infinite patience, watching our reflection in the mirror. We were no longer the terrified princess and the stoic servant. We were two old women, survivors of a war nobody else knew we had fought. "I'm sorry," Dara murmured, her eyes meeting mine in the glass. "I used to be the one who took care of you. Now I feel useless." "You are not useless," I said fiercely, pausing to rest my hands on her shoulders. "You carried me when I couldn't walk, Dara. You built the ground I stand on. If I have to brush your hair and button your shirts for the rest of my life, it will still be a debt I can never repay." We learned to navigate this new landscape of frailty together. I learned to cook, badly at first, then adequately, because standing at the stove hurt her back. She learned to let me carry the groceries. There was a profound sweetness in this dependency. In the vulnerability of aging, we found a new level of intimacy. It wasn't the fiery passion of our youth, the desperate need to consume each other. It was a quiet, enduring flame, like the embers of a fire that burns hot and steady through the night. We spent our evenings reading aloud to each other, our voices raspier but filled with the comfort of familiarity. We talked about the past without pain now. We laughed about the terrible haircut I gave myself in 1966. We wondered what happened to Eclipse, hoping he had lived a long, wild life in some French pasture. We had no regrets. Every wrinkle, every ache, every gray hair was a receipt for a life spent choosing love over duty. But there was one final piece of business left unfinished. For decades, we had worn gold bands on our ring fingers, telling people we were married to our work or making up stories about husbands who traveled. We knew the truth, but the law didn't. Then, in the spring of 2013, the news broke. France had passed the law. Marriage equality was real. I remember watching the announcement on the television, sitting on the sofa with Dara's head on my shoulder. She squeezed my hand, her grip weak but insistent. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "We can be legal, Lena. We can be real." I looked at her, my heart swelling with a joy I hadn't expected. We were in our 70s. We didn't need a piece of paper to prove we loved each other. We had proven it in the snow, in the factories, in the silence of 1,000 nights. But as I looked at the woman who had given up her entire world for me, I knew I wanted to give her this. I wanted to stand in front of a judge and say her name loud and clear. "We're going to do it," I said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm going to make an honest woman out of you, Dara." She laughed, a sound that cracked and wheezed but still held the melody of the girl I fell in love with. We started planning, not a grand royal wedding with carriages and bishops, but something far more precious. We were going to have the wedding we should have had 50 years ago. On the morning of our wedding, 50 years late, Paris woke up under a blanket of gray clouds. But to me, the city looked like it was painted in gold. We didn't have a carriage drawn by white horses or a cathedral filled with dignitaries. We took a taxi to the town hall of the 4th arrondissement. I wore a cream-colored suit that Dara had sewn for me, the fabric soft as butter against my skin, and she wore a deep blue velvet blazer that matched the color of the night sky when we fled Sarkovia. We held hands in the back of the cab, our knuckles swollen with age but our grip as fierce as teenagers. When we arrived at the city hall, I felt a kind of nervousness I hadn't expected. I had faced the wrath of a king, the poverty of exile, and the pressure of building an empire. But walking up those stone steps felt like the most momentous thing I had ever done. It wasn't fear, it was the sheer weight of history. For centuries, women like us had been erased, silenced, or punished. Today we were walking through the front door, demanding that the world write our names in the book of the living. The waiting room was filled with other couples, young men in nervous ties, women with flowers in their hair. But when they saw us, two white-haired ladies holding on to each other for balance, the room went quiet. It wasn't the silence of judgment we had known in the 60s. It was a silence of respect. A young girl smiled at us and whispered to her partner, and I realized with a shock that we were no longer outlaws. We were elders. We were the proof that love survives. The ceremony was short and unpretentious. The officiant, a woman with a tricolor sash across her chest, spoke about the values of the Republic: liberty, equality, fraternity. As she spoke, I looked at Dara. I didn't see the wrinkles or the silver hair. I saw the 18-year-old girl in the gray uniform who had dropped a hairbrush to hold me when I was falling apart. I saw the woman who had shoveled coal, sewn until her fingers bled, and stood by my side when the world wanted to tear us apart. When the time came to say, "I do," my voice didn't waver. I said, "we," with every cell in my body. I was saying yes to her, yes to us, and yes to the life we had stolen from the jaws of fate. Dara looked at me, her dark eyes shimmering with tears, and when she spoke her vows, her voice was a whisper that echoed like thunder in my heart. She promised to love me for the rest of her days, a promise she had already kept 10 times over. The officiant pronounced us spouses by the authority of the law. We kissed. It wasn't a hidden kiss in a stable or a stolen moment in a dark apartment. It was a kiss in the bright, fluorescent light of a government office, witnessed by the state and signed into record. In that moment, the last ghost of my father vanished. The laws of Sarkovia no longer mattered. The judgment of the church no longer mattered. We were legal. We were real. We walked out of the city hall into a sudden burst of sunlight. A small group of our former employees and the young designers from Maison Liberté were waiting for us, cheering and throwing white rose petals. I laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy as the petals caught in our hair. I looked at the ring on my finger, a simple gold band that finally had the weight of the law behind it. I felt a sense of completion so profound, it nearly brought me to my knees. That night, we celebrated with a dinner on our balcony. We drank vintage champagne and watched the Eiffel Tower sparkle, just as we had dreamed of doing when we looked at that battered postcard in my bedroom half a century ago. Dara was tired, her movement slow, but her smile was radiant. "We did it, Lena," she said, raising her glass. "We outran them all." Now, sitting here in my armchair, looking at the photo of that wedding day next to the photo of us as girls in 1966, I realize that our story isn't just a romance. It's a victory march. I look over at Dara, dozing in her chair beside me, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. She is frail now, and I know that our time together is growing short. But I am not afraid. We have lived a life that was supposed to be impossible. We turned a prison into a playground and a servant into a queen. I reach out and take her hand, her skin paper-thin and warm. She stirs slightly, sensing my touch even in her sleep, and her fingers curl around mine instinctively. This is my kingdom. This hand, this warmth, this silence shared between two souls who refuse to let go. My name is Elena, but to the woman I love, I am just Lena. I was born a princess, but I died a free woman. If there is a lesson in our journey, it is this. Do not let them tell you who to love. Do not let them tell you where you belong. If the world builds a wall, you build a door. If they lock the gate, you find a horse. And if they try to erase you, you write your name in letters so bold that history has no choice but to remember you. Thank you for listening to our story. I hope it gives you the courage to find your own freedom, whatever that may look like. I am going to sit here a while longer, holding my wife's hand, watching the sun go down over the city that gave us shelter. We are tired, we are old, and we are infinitely, beautifully happy. And that, my dears, is the only fairy tale ending that truly matters. If you loved our story and believe in love without barriers, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories like this with the world. Until next time.